Okay. Hi, I'm Carrie Cole, Director of the Gottman Institute, and I'm here with Doctors John and Julie Gottman, world-renowned relationship researchers. So we're excited to talk to you today about your new paper, The Natural Principles of Love, which was published in the Journal of Family Theory and Review.
Right.
And it summarizes the past 4 decades and a half of your work on relationship stability and happiness, as well as the theoretical implications of that empirical research, right?
Right.
I was so happy to read that article. I devoured it. It was fabulous. So I just kind of soaked it all in. I couldn't stop reading it. It was such a beautiful blend of the two of you. That was really evident in the work that I read. It was your research, right? All of the research that was poured into that. And Julie, it was your insight and intuition and clarity that really kind of brought it to life, and that has brought this theory to life, right? I hope. We really appreciate that. So, just to start with, why should we care so much about understanding love?
Well, I would say love is like food. So, the reality is that as human beings, we need love like sustenance. It's so very important to us. It nourishes our body. It helps us think clearly. It gives us reason to live. It gives us meaning and purpose in our life. And it's also a great mystery. And as we've sadly seen, it can fall apart. And so for us to be able to support love staying consistent, being there as sustenance for people in our world, we need to understand it better. And, that's part of my love of everything that you do, darling, that without really understanding the core principles of what can sustain love, what can create love, we don't know how to really help and heal when love is damaged. So that's where you come in.
Well, I would answer that question. I think Julie's right about that. And I would add that from a research standpoint, in the past 50 years, a new field has sprung up called social epidemiology. And epidemiologists really want to understand, the basis of health and longevity. And it turns out, at least in first world countries, what determines how long people live, how healthy they are, how quickly they recover from illness, is really the quality of their closest relationships. And Lisa Berkman-Lentzheim have pioneered this field, and it's led to research by Robert Putnam on social capital research. So social relationships are absolutely vital for longevity, health, and the health of communities and the economic prosperity of communities. Trust in people, trust in communities. And we need to understand the mechanisms by which we can build this kind of trust and love in people's lives, because it's really what is going to enable our species to continue and be successful. And if we don't master this, we're in deep trouble as a species.
Right, true. So your paper states that you had no hypotheses in the beginning. You observed, and then you described, and you measured the couple interactions. So can you tell us what you did to observe and to measure these couples?
Well, Bob Levinson and I started doing some of this research over 40 years ago, and I'd also been studying couples, so I was very interested in emotion, and Bob was very interested in emotion. And his expertise was in psychophysiology, and he was really interested in psychosomatic illnesses. So in studying relationships, what we wanted to do was just really figure out what was different about people whose relationships were going well which was not the case for Bob and me. And so, we were kind of idiots coming into this, and we thought, as Bob said, you can either have relationships or study them. So we were the ones studying them. And, we really didn't have very many hypotheses. We had a few, but we knew emotion was important. So we wanted to look at both people's internal perceptions of emotion, which is why we did this video recall rating dial. We wanted to observe behavior, interactive behavior, which is why we got full facial recording, so we could really use Ekman and Friesen's coding of faces. And we wanted to also look at physiology, which is why we were synchronizing physiological measures to the video timecode. And our basic question was, are there any patterns that discriminate people who have happy relationships, stable relationships, from those who have really unhappy and unstable relationships, or both? And can we discover anything about that? And if so, if there are patterns, how can we explain those? So we just started gathering data, because the field was full of hypotheses in couples and family therapy. And as it turned out, most of them were completely wrong.
Yeah, that's nice that you were able to kind of shed some light on that, right?
Yeah.
So, how is Gottman method theory different from the so-called kind of post-structural theory, such as strategic, or narrative?
Gosh, it's so completely different. Well, first of all, it's based on what couples actually do, as opposed to a myth about what we think they should do. Number one, and all of that comes out of the science. So those alternative theories were not based on any core principles of how couples really interact, which tells us how they need to change also. Secondly, our work really centered on 3 different domains: creating friendship, which nobody ever thought about; dealing with conflict, which everybody thought about; and creating shared meaning, also which nobody thought about. So our work has really encompassed a broader world of relationship, and really looking at the ways of creating positive interaction, not just managing the negative interaction. Secondly, we're looking for the good enough relationship, not the perfect relationship. That makes a big difference too.
Can you say more about that, Julie?
Yes. Well, for example, some theories, not even theories, but really systems of trying to change relationship are saying things like you can really heal, your partner's internal world. You can really heal their childhood injuries and things like that. And yes, love can go a long way towards helping somebody to feel better about themselves, for example. But it's quite a tall order. It's such an idealized view of what people can do for each other that suggests we can really control the healing of our partner. And in fact, we really can't. And so what we're looking for is the good enough relationship where, as John likes to say, if couples can, meet for breakfast and have pastry and coffee and have a nice chat, all right, that's great. That's a good thing. Third, our methods really are combining what we know couples need to do in order to sustain friendship, romance, passion, manage conflict, and create deeper shared meaning. But we're trying to take ourselves out of the equation so that we're giving couples the ability to do this with each other when they go home, as opposed to only doing it when they come to the office and we do everything for them.
So you're building skills.
So we're building skills. We're also going deeper into really helping people with one another in their conversation, uncover those deeper layers of meaning that people harbor inside. But we're not doing all the work for the couple. So, that's another big difference. And finally, I want to say that some of those older methods, first of all, were based on the wrong information about what couple needed, and some of them were downright manipulative. So, in other words, the relationship between the therapist and the partners was one in which the therapist, like in paradoxical intention work, the therapist was not being straight with the partners, but then expected the partners to be straight and honest with each other. So how does that make sense? So, we're doing it in a little bit more kind of above board way, where our intentions are clear. It's based on assessment. What do the couples really need versus what do they not need, which had never been done before we started doing this stuff. We have 3 sessions of assessment. It's in depth. So we're pinpointing what couples really need to work on. And then we're giving couples the ability to do things themselves that are modeled on what we've seen successful couples do in 4 decades of John's research. So it's a very different picture.
Makes so much sense. Would you add something?
I just wanted to add one thing, which is that we're a lot closer to Salvador Minuchin's structural family therapy than all the other postmodern therapies. Because Sal Minuchin really says, there are successful families and unsuccessful families. And he's tried to understand the differences. And we've done the same in the laboratory. Mm-hmm. But we're much closer to what Minuchin does in that, we really want to change the nature of couples interaction and family interaction so that the balance is much more toward positive affect, as Julie mentioned, than negative affect. Because the problem really is negative affect spiraling and continuing to spiral in dysfunctional families that are really kind of in an absorbing state of negativity. So you mentioned a lot of different family therapies, but I think the structural family therapy is the one that we're closest to, because many of the other therapies don't want to make a judgment. They don't, they're cultural relativists. They don't want to say this family is dysfunctional and that family isn't. They want to accept everything. Well, we know that there are families that really aren't doing well, where the children aren't doing well, where the couple isn't doing well, where they're really failing in a lot of ways, and they wind up breaking up and divorcing, and the kids wind up in trouble. So we want really to get behind the dynamics that foster health and happiness in relationships and stability.
I want to go back and pick up on something that you said earlier, Julie, about the kind of focusing on the friendship and also the shared meaning. Mm-hmm. So let's take the friendship first, that people hadn't really, the therapist and theorist hadn't really focused on. It was all on conflict management, right? So tell me more about the friendship system.
Okay. First of all, in the past, the other therapies assumed that if you managed conflict, the friendship would blossom.
Just
everything would be fine.
Flows.
All the nice, lovely feelings would be there, and everybody would be close, and, they'd go to the circus and have fun. So, anyway. But here's what we've seen. We've seen that there really has to be conscientious effort to also create friendship, especially today in our modern age. And here's why. People are busy. People are working so friggin' hard just to survive, really.
Right.
And so what that means is oftentimes the relationship is the last thing on the list of things to do for that day. So what we saw is that there are really 3 parts of creating friendship, and we learned this from John's research in the apartment lab, where we were just watching couples for 24 hours. What did they do when there was no structure, nothing being told to do? What would they do?
Right.
So we saw 3 different things that were really key to building a good friendship and, incidentally, romance and passion. First, they would ask each other questions personal questions and big open-ended questions that would lead to the other person sharing with the first person who they really are. Who am I? What do I think? What do I believe? What are my needs? And so one partner was really showing curiosity and a desire to really know the other partner and to almost create a landscape map of who that other partner was by the answers to big questions like, what legacy would you like to leave behind at the end of your life? What characteristics would you like to pass down to our children, etc.? So big questions like that. So they were continuing to ask each other questions over time, not just in getting to know you the first 3 months of a relationship, but
Right.
over time with the recognition that both people were evolving and changing with time. And so their answers would change too. And people wanted to stay up to date with one another. Secondly, they would express fondness and admiration frequently. So again, it wasn't just during the courtship. They were telling each other the things they loved about each other every single day, every day. So that it wasn't, like as John likes to say, the story of the Minnesota farmer who loved his wife so much that after 25 years, he almost told her. Well, no, not quite. So we have to share those things frequently because we need to hear it.
Right.
That's who we are. It's
Right.
not immature to want to hear it. We need to hear it. It's part of needing to feel loved.
Yeah.
So those couples would be, again, conscientiously expressing with their words, with touch, with glances, how much they loved and respected their partners. And third, this was the big one that came out of the Love Lab and the Apartment Lab, turning toward was an important part of friendship. And what we mean by turning toward are how do partners respond to the other person's little tiny bids for connection or big bids for connection? How do people respond when you say, "Hey, Charlie"? Does Charlie just ignore that? Or does Charlie say, "What do you want?" which is turning against? Or does Charlie say, "Yeah, there's a bid for connection." There's turning toward the partner in just a little tiny way.
And very simple.
And very
thing.
simple, little tiny nuts and bolts that made a huge difference. Huge difference. Successful couples turn towards each other
6% of the time.
86% of the time. And unsuccessful couples turn towards each other, about 33?
33%.
33. I almost got those numbers. 33% of the time. So, huge difference. 50%, over 50% of difference between how couples turn towards each other or didn't turn towards each other. And that made the difference between a great relationship and a lousy relationship.
Yeah.
So that shows us how important it is to build those ways of connecting with one another through friendship. And it makes all the difference in the world 5 years down the road.
Plus the domains are so connected because everyday emotional connection, which doesn't take a long time, but it's very important, really affects the nature of conflict. If they're turning toward bids, if they're really connecting on an everyday emotional basis, then they have a sense of humor during conflict. They can reduce part of this physiological arousal. They start more gently because they already feel connected. So, what is it that escalates conflict is the sense that you're not going to be heard. But if you're connecting emotionally, then you kind of know that your partner's going to listen to you, particularly when you're bothered by something or upset. So that negative affect is going to get attuned to. When negative affect is attuned to, positive affect starts building by itself. That's kind of cool.
Very cool. And I think you just said that it also impacts their ability to have a sense of humor with
Right.
each other.
Yeah. That was the secret to humor. Yeah, Janny Driver discovered that.
That's fascinating.
Right. One of my graduate students, yeah.
So tell me more about the shared meaning part that you were talking about, Julie, earlier.
Okay, so creating shared meaning is really wonderful. I mean, one of the things that both John and I have really recognized is that all people, no matter what their education, no matter what their little IQ numbers are, etc., everybody's a philosopher.
Mm-hmm.
And what that means is everybody is searching for ways to give their lives meaning. Most people are aware that their time is limited, whether they say that out and out or not, they're aware of it. And because of that, they know they only have so much time on this earth to do all that they can do, to create meaning for their lives, to have their lives have some significance. So, well and good. People, each individual has that sense of meaning. But what we're talking about here in terms of creating shared meaning is people sharing what is meaningful for them individually with their partner. Now, when I say share, I don't mean they have to have the same values. They have to be like this.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, what it means is they're communicating about what's meaningful for them individually with their partner. And in the relationship, the partners are trying hard to honor what's important to the other person and to help that other person fulfill what's meaningful for them.
Mm-hmm.
So creating shared meaning is really about, not the myth. It's not the myth of you've got to be compatible, you've got to have everything in common, all the same values. Not really. What you really need to do is to be able to communicate your values, communicate your intentions, communicate what's really important to you with your partner, and for each person to support the other in trying to live by what's meaningful for that person. In addition, we discovered, again, this was all part of the research, we discovered, and especially with the help of another researcher, William Doherty, fabulous psychologist. He learned from his work that families who are successful create intentional rituals of connection. What that means is little things like, how do you say goodbye to each other in the morning? How do you reunite at the end of the day? How do you say goodnight? To bigger things, how do you celebrate birthdays? How do you celebrate major holidays? How do you take care of each other when one is sick? So ways of really talking about what's meaningful and then creating ways of living a pocket of time in a meaningful way for both of you that you have co-designed, that both of you have agreed is the way we want to live our lives.
Okay, so that's the shared part. There's
That's
sharing
the
and the
shared.
rituals that bring meaning to your life.
Exactly.
Great.
Yeah.
Would you add anything to that, John?
Yeah, people carry this shared meaning system
Mhm.
in their heads and their bodies. And in the oral history interview, we tap into this story of us that people carry in their minds. A story of the two of us and a story that each of us have about our partner's character. And, and that gives sort of the sense that even when we're alone, our partner is here with us, and we're really in a way, braided together.
Yes.
And, we're not just a relationship. We're really a system that has purpose and value and meaning, and it really creates the strength in a relationship. So the shared meaning system is very important. And again, that shared meaning system impacts the friendship. It's a tremendous buffer during times of stress and interacts with conflict as well. So those three domains, friendship and intimacy, conflict and shared meaning, all interact with one another bidirectionally.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Could I add one more thing?
You bet.
One of the things that I've seen, and I think you have too, John, is that when we have couples in our office who are just highly distressed, every single level of their relationship is a mess. what we have seen is that oftentimes the glue that keeps them together while they are working on everything else is creating shared meaning. So if a couple has some sense of shared meaning, whatever that is, whether it's, we want to raise our kids to be wonderful world citizens, or we really believe in trying to support the ecology of our world and to help the earth sustain itself. Whatever those shared values are, or shared meaning between the two of them, that can be incredibly powerful glue. It's like epoxy that keeps the relationship hanging in there while they're working on building their friendship and helping manage conflict. So it's a very important part of the relationship.
Yes, it is. And I think that kind of gets overlooked a lot.
It does. That's right.
So we learned through your research that marital happiness seems to plummet when couples have babies. What did you learn about that?
Well, we found that when a baby arrives, 2/3 of couples have a big precipitous drop in relationship happiness in the first 3 years of the baby's life. And we can pick that up, in conflict discussions. Hostility increases even when the tapes are scored double blind. And it transfers to the baby, so it impacts the baby in a very important way. And Julie and I, by studying the 1/3 of couples who don't have that experience, and it turns out they were different even a couple of months after the wedding, way before they were even thinking about having kids. By looking at those differences, we were able to create a workshop, 2-day workshop, and for 77% of couples, going through that 2-day workshop prevented that drop in relationship happiness. And it just involved just what Julie has been talking about, working on friendship, working on shared meaning, which changes enormously when a baby arrives, really reorients. Who am I? Who are we? What kind of a family do we want to be? And, conflict, attending to conflict, and keeping intimacy going, and especially keeping fathers involved with babies, and both partners involved with babies if it's a gay or lesbian couple as well. And so we found that we could have an enormous impact on, think of it, the majority of couples in the United States when a baby arrives have this drop in relationship happiness, and it's impacting the baby. It dysregulates the baby's emotion. It really retards emotional, social development and intellectual development as well, because it affects the attentional system. The baby doesn't take the workshop, yet the baby is impacted by the parents having taken the workshop.
Well, the baby does. If the mom is pregnant,
right,
the baby is in there listening to every word.
That's right. Yeah, and there's less cortisol going through the intrauterine barrier, which does affect the quality of the intrauterine, system. So, that's I think one of our greatest successes is that Bringing Baby Home workshop, which has been taught to 1,500 people in over 20 countries now, and it has an enormous impact. And we can go beyond 77% if we add a support group to that. So it's being taught in a lot of hospitals around the world.
Imagine the impact that would have on our communities everywhere.
Right.
So what would you add to that, Julie?
Well, one of the things that I found really fascinating, just having started in individual therapy, is the fact that not only did that Bringing Baby Home workshop change the marriages or the relationships between the parents, but also there was a huge difference, significant difference between the parents who didn't, the mothers actually, who didn't take the workshop and the mothers who did, in terms of signs of postpartum depression after the babies were born. It was something like about 55%, I think, in the mothers who did not take the workshop.
66.
Gosh dang it, I never get those numbers right. 66?
Yeah.
Really? Okay. 66% of the moms who didn't take the workshop showed a lot of signs of postpartum depression. The ones who did take the workshop,
22.
22%.
Oh my goodness, that's a huge
So again,
difference.
a huge difference, a 40% difference in the prevalence of postpartum depression that the workshop really influenced significantly. So that was a wonderful thing to see because, of course, postpartum depression is a horrible thing
Yes.
for mothers to suffer from. And, of course, it influences the baby in those early, very formative months of life, as well as the relationship between the parents. So to be able to change that was pretty cool.
Yes.
It's also the only intervention that gets dads involved with daughters as well as sons.
Mm.
They get involved with the baby, regardless of the gender of the baby.
Right.
And the dads do more child care and housework if they take the workshop.
So all you mothers out there, pay attention.
All you fathers out there, pay attention.
Right.
I know, but the moms can get the dads to go to the workshop because they'll get help with housework, amongst other things.
Well, and it also really gets behind a new movement, which the women's movement really helped create, which is the idea of the nurturing father.
Right.
A father who is a loving father involved with his children.
Right.
And really an emotionally engaged father. And that's huge. That's been a huge social change that has been building. So our workshop really facilitates that development in fathers.
Fascinating. And important.
Yeah. So I think we have time for about one more question, something like that.
So there's one question from the Facebook fans, and this says, you write, masters of relationship, which are the couples who stay together and are not unhappy, know how to move from gridlock to dialogue on their perpetual problems because they are both able to express a fundamental acceptance of their partner's personality.
Right.
And discuss and understand the existential hidden agendas, the dreams in their partner's positions on the issue.
I think that the person who asked this question ought to be writing books.
Yeah.
Because that was a perfect synopsis.
Yes.
Yeah, it really was.
It says, their question is, wow, that sounds hard. This doesn't sound like something you work out during dating or early in a relationship. How do you think couples get to this point?
Let me tell you a story,
Okay.
if I can.
I love your stories.
Well, this a couple, in our 20-year longitudinal study that was done mostly in Bob Levinson's lab in the Bay Area in California. And I remember this one couple, and he's a very introverted guy, and she was a very extroverted woman. And they were just very different, and of course attracted to these characteristics. I mean, he knew he would never have a social life if it wasn't for her. And she liked his stability, his thoughtfulness, his calm, the way he loved. She really appreciated that. Yet when they started building a relationship in the very beginning, they talked about in their oral history interview, she wanted him to be more outgoing and talk about his feelings. She wanted him to be more like her. He wanted her, to be more introverted. Did she have to invite the whole church over every Sunday? He liked quiet. But even though they had this perpetual issue about the differences in their personality, they still appreciated one another so much. And it was part of their dialogue, this acceptance, even though these qualities were somewhat annoying over time. And they talked about it in our lab. And she said, okay, so she said, communication. So what are your deepest inner feelings? And he started laughing because he's not that outgoing a guy, but he knew, what she was talking about, that, she wanted him to be more forthcoming about what was stressing him out and not to withdraw. And so it's an amazing couple, really, by their humor, by their affection for one another, by their admiration of one another's personalities, really could talk about these perpetual issues. And so it's not like they, needed a PhD in psychology to do this. It wasn't that huge a thing to be that accepting of one another. The other thing that they were able to do is to really say, so what's going on when you're so stressed out, she said to him, and you get so quiet? And he said, and he talked about it. He said, it's because I can't pay some of the bills, particularly the insurance. And for me, that's so important because I want to be a protector of the family. So that's getting a hidden existential meaning. But he's able to talk about that. She says, well, that's really important. I can see why you got so stressed out and got so quiet. And what can I do to help with that? You know, and so, you know, it's not this magical thing that requires, you know, super intelligence. It's really kind of waiting a beat and really, you know, not coming out with your own agenda and finding out where your partner's at a deeper level.
So being curious about
Right.
your partner,
Yeah,
trying to
really.
understand them.
That's what the masters are doing. And 86% of our couples do it in our Art and Science of Love workshop every weekend. So, you know, it's not that difficult, but it is wondrous. You know, once you discover what they're doing, you go, wow, that's really amazing. How can we teach people to do that?
Right.
But what they're doing is really kind of natural, I think. Do you want to add to that?
You know, I think that was just beautiful.
Okay,
I don't need
good. All
to
right.
say a word. It was great.
Great. So if you're interested in learning more about how therapists are using Gottman Methods couple therapy, please visit the Journal of Family Theory and Review to read the responses to this paper by other certified Gottman therapists. Bill Bunbury, Davey Munier, Don Cole, myself, Carrie Cole, and Dave Penner.
Yeah.
Great. Thanks so much, Carrie.
Thank you, Carrie.
And thank
That
you,
was great.
everyone.